process with the municipalities and with the government. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here. So first of all, I'd like to say that CB has been a supporting partner of WOFI since 2019. And we are supporting WOFI because subnational governments are central to achieving the mandate of the CB, which is an MDB with a purely social mandate. And we support subnational governments with financing, with technical assistance, and also with knowledge sharing, and in collaboration with partners such as the OECD. So we work in 43 countries, which are the EU countries, the accession countries, and most recently Ukraine. So I'm not going to repeat what has been said about the importance of reliable and comparable data. I think we all know that. I'm just going to talk about how we actually using the WOF in our work. So first of all, for our financing, we actually find the country profiles very helpful in when we do the technical appraisals of our operations. And it's important for us to understand the interplay between the different elements of the municipal finance systems. And we usually find that the projects that we support are financed by a combination of loans, grants, own source revenues, and the strongest municipalities are those that are able to diversify their sources of funding and financing. And also the WOF is really contributing to the quality of our knowledge sharing initiatives. So last year we published a study on city resilience. So we look at, we identified 7 enabling city actions that are key to strengthen resilience and leave no one behind. And 2 of these actions are of course, developing sustainable financing solutions and coordinating initiatives within a multi-level governance system. And we work closely with Isabel and her team to integrate the WOFI data for European countries. So in terms of the findings and why they are important, well, I like to say that a key issue for the CB as a social development bank is how to align revenues and expenditures at the local level with the green and social agenda. Because in a world of scarce resources, linking the financing with outcomes is so important. And WOFI has identified a number of emerging and innovative budgeting practices, such as participatory budgeting and green budgeting. And it's very encouraging to see that some national governments are adopting such practices. And participatory budgeting can really contribute to financing local climate adaptation solutions and also channeling funding to the most vulnerable communities, such as Lisbon has done. So and the key question is how can we support cities to mainstream such budgeting practices, and I think this is really an opportunity also for capacity building. So the second point is that the WOFI really highlights the importance of grants and transfer, in particular in a period of crisis. And we at the CB have seen that as we have been supporting national and some national governments at the time of COVID and also as part of the recovery. And we also see that municipal borrowing is constrained. Because of the regulatory framework, because of the limited fiscal space. And for that, the blending of the loans and the grants is so important so that we can achieve equitable outcomes and really reach the weakest municipalities that might be able to take just small loans. And we support the public development banks through our intermediated financing instruments. And we find the PDBs are very important to blend loans, for instance, from NDBs with grants from national governments or like the EU, such as the Recovery and Resilience Facility, so that they can then channel those funds to municipalities that really need those funds the most. And indeed, the Recovery and Resilience Facility has been very important for European countries to also finance the social and the green agenda, and some national governments are among the main beneficiaries. So the last point I wanted to mention is about the multi-level governance, which is really emphasized by WOFI. And in our work, we see that multi-level governance structures really need to become the new normal if for cities to be able to finance transformational projects. That's what we talked about previously. And we published just this month a study that we have done with the city of Barcelona on the Superblock program, which is an initiative that's carried out by the city to transform it so that it can meet the challenges of the 21st century. And it's really about reclaiming public space for people in a way that's inclusive and economically vibrant. It's about transforming urban streets and mobility pattern. It's about empowering communities so they can co-design solutions that really work for people and the planet. And I'm mentioning this example because the multi-level governance system was key for actually designing and implementing this initiative. So I'm talking about both horizontal coordination among the city departments as well as the vertical coordination between the national and the local government. That was key to ensure that the initiative delivered not just environmental benefits, but also social, economic, and health benefits, and then also to mobilize resources so that it could be scaled up citywide. So I just want to close by emphasizing a policy message that was mentioned yesterday, and I think it's, in my view, very important, about the need to sort of like change the narrative of municipal finance and to focus on outcomes, so that the goal is not to finance some national governments, but is to finance the green and the social agenda through a territorial approach. And I think the WOFI is playing a key role in not just to strengthen the empirical evidence and providing the data, but also to highlight how finance and governance are so key and critical to really deliver on the social and the green agenda.
Thank you very much, right on time. And I mean, it's a great testimony as well. And I think that maybe OECD, you should think about how to increase the fees for the CB, because the use of the data and the WOFI is really broad and interesting. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for bringing also the local adaptation dimension of local climate adaptation dimension of that. Thank you. Let's move now to Nicolas Penven, Head of International Public Finance for Fitch Rating, to see a little bit if you think that if you use WOFI or if you think that those data are important in the process of rating municipalities and how. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Christelle, for that question. Many of you know what a rating agency is, but perhaps it's worth reminding what we do exactly. It's very short. Our mandate is super narrow. We assess the risk that the debt is not reimbursed, or alternatively, that an issuer, a borrower, does not service its debt. That is super simple, and obviously it implies credit analysis. And so I'm a credit analyst, I'm a risk analyst, managing a team of 85 people around the globe. And what it means, performing an analysis, is also very simple. It's taking a whole and breaking it down into parts, and making sure that those parts make sense and explain the whole. So why am I taking that kind of back to the basics mode? It's just because we can better capture the two ends of the spectrum, the big picture on one end, and the very granular thing, the data, at the other end. And I think where the WOFI is helpful to us is because we use it at those both ends. On the big picture thing, it's very helpful to understand how a country is organized, is set up, who does what, with which magnitudes. So in that respect, the country profiles are super helpful. They are very good summaries. And I must be very transparent with you. Our analysts are usually very good at looking into the details. They are less good at getting the big picture. So those country profiles are very helpful. And arguably, we have people active in more than 40 countries, more than 20 nationalities. They are supposed to have a fairly good grasp of everything we are covering, but the WOFI covers, I think, 135 countries. So every time we get to a new country, or every time an analyst comes from somewhere else and needs to be, to have a catch-up, I refer them to the WOFI country profiles. It's super helpful. We also produce the equivalent, we call them framework reports, for each government tier that we cover, or at least we have that for almost all the countries we follow. And we use the country profiles to document that research. At the other end of the spectrum, the data, arguably, again, we have a privileged access to borrowers. Usually, it's not always the case, but usually we have a contract with the entity that gets a rating, and they open their books to us. And more than that, they explain, they discuss, they provide a lot of information. That's good. And that is something that perhaps the WOFI team doesn't have. So we may be complementary. But there is a limit to that. Usually, and I'm getting to Elton's point, we don't get that same level of information on the neighbors. And we also need to compare, because another peculiarity of our mandate is that our ratings are ordinal instruments. They rank the risks. We are incapable of doing an absolute measure of risk. We don't give a probability of default. It's impossible. We give ranges based on the history, but what we try to do is to give a ranking, which is done through the scale, which is universal. Every country, every asset class has the same scale, and a triple B has just more risk to default than a single A, etc. And within that, we rank the credits. So it is very important to be able to rank a given credit with its neighbors and similar, I like the term you use, the similar or quasi-similar, what we call peers. So for that, we always also look at the data. Sometimes we have individual data, sometimes we use aggregates for an average of the tier, for example, the tier 2 in a given country where we are trying to assign a rating. So that is how we use the WOFI. And I think there is a general comment I wanted to make as well. We try to get a normative role. I said we provide simple output. A rating is super simple, right? It's a few letters and plus or minus, very simple. And it's appreciated by investors because it is simple, easy to understand, easy to use, easy to incorporate into their investment workflows. So that is what we try to do. We have in common with the WOFI team to produce some form of normative information. We are a provider of information. It has to be simple and global. And I think what the WOFI is trying to do is also to put in a framework things which are very different, because where, Elton, you also mentioned that. Yes, it is similar, but it's not the same. And very often the same terms do not translate the same reality. And someone has to explain that, to put that, to give a sense to this. That's where my breaking down explanation kicks in. And then, once you have broken down everything, you need to rebuild it to make sense and put that into a sort of universal framework. And again, that is where an initiative like the WOFI is important to us. So I think it's both feeding our work, it's complementary. Obviously, it's not substituting, otherwise I would not be super happy if it were just cutting the grass beneath our feet. But it's not the case, yes, it's super helpful.
Thank you very much. I mean, and yeah, I like what you said about this regional dimension. This is something that we thought about at some point, to look at some kind of big region and compare inside the region what is similar, but not totally the same. Thank you. Thank you, Nicola. So we looked a little bit on this expansion of the fiscal space and access to borrowing, access to the financial market to some extent, and there are a lot of comparison and probably exchange that we could have further on the WOFI and the rating process. Let's now move to the capacity building of the role of the WOFI. Of course, there has been already a lot of training being done. I mean, some MOOC, and I have a list here with UCLG, with the AFD campus, with FMDV, DLOG, GIZ, the UMOA in West Africa. Also some initiative in Latin America, Asia, and the Pacific, as well as with the CEB on a webinar on local integration of refugees. So there are a lot of examples of what has been done in terms of training. But in terms of capacity building, and I mean, we also can look at some examples from others. We have online Mr. Alexander Ameya. He is the Director of Division for People and Social Inclusion and the head of CIFAL Global Network, the UN Institute for Training and Research, UNITAR. Hi, Mr. Meya. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Thank you for being here, and thank you for your patience being online. So the question for you is, what training does UNITAR offer for municipalities? Is there any focusing on local finance? And how do you see the role WOFI could play in terms of, I mean, working on local government accountability, transparency? From what you heard on this WOFI, how do you see that could be used, or is it already used in the CIFAL and in the UNITAR training? Over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Congratulations to all of you for a most interesting dialogue. Now, to answer your question, I would say three things. Number one, that yes, we have already always pointed at WOFI as some of the most valuable resources when we teach on municipal finance. We will continue to do so. Of course, that perhaps, and that's a conversation with the UCLG, our colleagues at UNCDF are highly appreciated by us and doing a great work. I think we can do more in actually training widely on the WOFI as a resource, as an asset, right? So the first answer is yes, we do use it, but simply pointed at it. But the second one is that we do have a network of training centers, 31 around the world, focus on municipalities. It's called the CIFAL Global Network, with C as in Charlie. And I don't know if I can share my screen, but I wanted to show you, even if it is just that map, that would be very good. But if not, I will simply describe it. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Because if you can see this map, what you have there is a global network of experts providing training opportunities for municipalities, for local actors, and trying to help in the localization of the Sustainable Development Goals. There are dedicated team there. There is most of the time an expert on municipal finance. And what we get to hear from all these directors and their teams is that depending on in the first presentation, I think this was also presented, depending on the level of complexity and the level of capacity of a government, then the training that we offer is well received. Sometimes it doesn't. So I wanted in explaining what is it that we have and what we can do and put in the CIFAL Global Network at your service. I also need to say that depending on the level of capacity of a municipality, we have a bigger challenge when the municipality is really not that well versed or has no mechanisms, adequate technology to deal with municipal finance. So let me stop sharing, because I also wanted to go back to something that you say. Our main commitment, of course, will always be that we get more and more beneficiaries from municipalities. I'll give you a number. Last year in 2022, UNITAR trained 384,000 government officials. But if you go down and you see the separation between national, subnational, and local, I'm very sorry to tell you that we don't even get to 20%. And most of it comes from the CIFAL Global Network. So I think there is a lot to do in terms of building capacity, offering training opportunities, something that we say here as a motto, but it's not just an idea. Please allow me to pause here because it's very important. Training is not only giving information to people, right? I think most of us knows that. It's not just exposing people to a manual, to a toolkit, and so on. Training is to take information and hopefully transform that into knowledge. That's the business in which we are. I believe UCLG is also providing that. There is very much to do. Municipal finance has, and I want to finish with the following, transparency and anti-corruption. Municipal finance has such a great potential to maintain local governments pristine, transparent, accountable. But for that, we need better systems, we need better capacity, and we need to maintain this commitment that most local governments have around the world. I come from Latin America, and I can tell you, I saw the numbers in the previous presentations, but in our region, municipalism is very important. And it's very important, not only because it manages more and more resources and bigger finances, but because of its legitimacy. Most of our citizens, and that can be shared from many places around the world, actually see the local government, just to personalize in one person, the mayor or a council member as the face of government. It's not the minister or the deputy minister, perhaps the president, because of course everyone knows who the leader of country is, but who do they go to ask for solutions? The mayor, the council members, the directors within a municipality, or just an employee of a municipality. So to do so, to provide solutions at the local level, we need to have more capacity when dealing with finances, and WOFI indeed is an excellent resource that we recommend to everyone and that we will continue to promote throughout the years. Let me stop there. I didn't mean to make it that long, but if you want, I can elaborate a little more. Back to you, please.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you very much for those words and transforming training into knowledge. And I mean, looking at partnership with the WOFI, as well as looking at what the local authority think about the WOFI, how they can use it, and the testimony before from the Vice Governor of Indonesia is also very interesting, and it's linked to what you're saying. So thank you very much. So let's move now to the research part of what the WOFI can do or could do. And I will give the floor to Mr. Professor Paul Smoke. So you're Professor of Public Finance and Planning at the New York University Robert Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. So, I mean, Paul, is WOFI adequate for research? I mean, do you use it? Do you see that as really part of your thinking and your research on fiscal decentralization? And what are the articulation in your view between training, research, and this WOFI exercise? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Christel. And thanks everybody for the comments. It's interesting. I do want to take just a half a minute to, I think, re-emphasize what people have been saying and what I think Isabel tried to tell us. But there really is nothing like this. It's so much more detailed than other sources. And you know, we all used to use the IMF database, which was very problematic, but it was the old standby. And it just brings in elements that aren't treated elsewhere or are treated separately or used in case studies. But so, you know, you might have databases on governance or finance or something like that. You're trying to do all this. I think you're using some aspects of subnational government finance that are routinely covered, but also the various reports focus on specific topics or themes that provide a deeper dive into important issues in the field. And most importantly, I think, and I think this relates to your point, contextualize the data in terms of the country institutional structure, governance, and other characteristics. There just really is nothing else like this. And so in terms of research, I would have to say that rather, I mean, this hasn't been in existence that long, but I think pretty much everybody is turning to this. And, you know, there's some wrinkles to work out, you know them well, and I'm sure others will raise them. But I think that it is increasingly cited in academic publications, and it's really used by a lot of the development agencies. And the reports themselves are so useful that I often see, and I've done it myself, where we've simply borrowed, and of course appropriately credit, tables directly from the report. But there are some variations in the data reporting and formatting, so sometimes you have to be creative if you're pulling, visuals from different reports. But still, it's really a fantastic resource. But the real thing for me is that the online database allows easy classification of countries along multiple dimensions, as well as the classification, aggregation, and disaggregation of data, which is really not easily available to people who are working in this field. There simply is no other subnational government finance data source that allows the kind of manipulation to this extent and the ability to attach it to the contextual information. So I was writing down this morning, and I may run out of time before I get through these, but I was trying to think about examples of things that I've worked on and that have been worked on by various development agencies. And I think I'm going to focus more on what the international organizations have done rather than journal articles and things like that. I don't even read half of those anymore, So, but I think that a lot of the research that is done by the international organizations, which of course is more applied, is relying on this. And so well beyond what OECD and UCLG are using this data for. This is just, I'm going to run through some of these, and I may stop at some point if I see my clock running out. But it's been used in a lot of World Bank reports, including some of the recent governance practice papers on the intersection of decentralization and climate change response that have been published in recent years. I did one of these papers, but there are others that I didn't focus as much on the fiscal. The World Bank City Creditworthiness Initiative uses the OECD UCLG database in its effort to develop country profiles. The data were used by David and other authors, including me, in the UNCDF flagship publication, Local Government Finances, Development Finance. A team I worked with at the Inter-American Development Bank used some data from this source in an examination of the role of subnational governments in the COVID-19 pandemic response in selected countries in Latin America. I had a grant from the Gates Foundation to look at the global architecture of PFM reform, and one of the papers we did looked at the subnational flow of finances in the health sector in selected African countries, and we used this data. The data have been used in a number of Asian Development Bank reports, and ADBI, the Asian Development Bank Research Institute, research publications, including a paper I did on developing a spectrum of mechanisms to support subnational development finance in middle and lower income countries. There was recently a critical review prepared for the Institute for Development Studies in the UK and the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation on the global landscape of development partner support for municipal finance. That used this database. The UN DESA, prompted by the UN Committee of Experts on Public Administration, has been preparing a set of guidance notes on effective governance for sustainable development, and several of these focus on such topics as fiscal federalism, decentralization, municipal finance. I wrote one of these. These data are in all those that use the finance angle. ODI, once called the Overseas Development Institute, has recently been doing a lot of work on subnational finance, including a recent paper on subnational financial intermediaries in Africa, which people may not have seen yet because it's brand new. Happy to share it with people. And I'm currently working on a paper with the International Finance Corporation trying to understand the landscape of subnational borrowing in certain middle-income countries. Why do some of them borrow and others don't? And this is the data that we're using. And I've only got 24 seconds, but I want to just say just a couple more things. I really see also, and this is part of capacity building, education, and learning, that the way this database allows development partners to show counterparts in finance and local government ministries how their subnational governments compare to their neighbors in the region or to other countries with similar characteristics. And this helps to identify differences and generate discussion about why these differences exist, whether they're good or bad, and what options there might be to deal with them. And then finally, just in terms of teaching, I think both teaching at a university and professional capacity building activities, I use this in several of my classes. These data add a concrete angle to the discussion. In the past, I would pick a couple of countries that I knew and could find data on and say, oh, look at this one on this end and look at this one on that end. Now I can show them the whole spectrum, and it just gives people a broader comparative perspective that really wasn't available before. And I use the database in course exercises so that students have an opportunity to have a hands-on experience using subnational finance data. And then they learn how to do that, and then they hopefully will get jobs where they'll do that. And in a bunch of seminars that I've done with people from various countries, I use this. I just recently had a visit of a delegation from the Indonesian Ministry of Finance and PTSMI. The gentleman who spoke to us this morning, they came to New York University over the summer, and David Jackson was also there. And I used data from WOFI in a discussion of subnational borrowing and to show Indonesia how they compared with other countries in terms of borrowing. And I'm not sure they were that happy to see the results, but there they were. And so I just think that there's a lot of work to be done. You know, we're going to have a lot of conversations about this, but I think that this has really been a game changer for people who need data on this topic.
Thank you so much, Paul. I mean, WOFI as a game changer, that's really a great compliment to all the work that has been done. And yeah, I mean, you show how the WOFI has filled the gap in many ways. Thank you very much for this, and also how this complements some monography that you could do, but it's not enough. And then here you expand the scope of the light and what you can see. Thank you very much. I'm looking at David to know how long we still have. It's 3:30. So what do you? Just to know how long we have for the question, and then we have the recommendation and the way forward from Kader.
So what I suggest we do is, this has been an amazing session, really rich, and it's clear that the way the WOFI has covered all of the different areas of the Malaga agenda has been really interesting, the way it's come out. So what we could do, given where we are now, is stop now, and then go to, that would give us, half an hour, maybe even 45 minutes to have a kind of overall wrap-up, where we just open the floor for people to come in on their feedback on each of the sessions. What are the kind of 2 or 3 different points that they would like to take forward as a policy agenda? I fear if we have a discussion now on the WOFI with lots of questions from the floor, we'll run out of time for that wrap-up. But included in that wrap-up is what do people want to take forward from the WOFI session as well. So we will get it in that way. Would that be okay?
Yes, we still have, Kader has prepared something just to wrap up and to propose some recommendation from UCLGA on the way forward. And then we can move. Is that okay with you?
Well, it's perfect, because okay. Kader can be the segue. So Kader is the bridge to the wrap-up. So over to you,
Kader, over to you.
Yes, so I will speak in French for this session and this presentation. Tout d'abord, je voudrais remercier tous les intervenants pour la richesse de vos contributions. Redire pourquoi l'Observatoire, le WOFI, donc, est un projet vraiment important pour CGLU. Et avant ça, revenir un petit peu, pour ceux qui ne connaîtraient pas dans le détail les activités de CGLU, redire ce qu'est CGLU. CGLU, c'est un réseau mondial, une fédération qui rassemble toutes les collectivités et les réseaux d'élus à l'échelle mondiale, donc qui rassemble, représente, porte la voix des réseaux d'élus et des collectivités sur la scène internationale auprès des États. Nous sommes particulièrement impliqués dans le dialogue avec les Nations Unies. On mène des activités principalement de recherche, de plaidoyer, mais aussi des activités d'apprentissage, de mise en réseau. Et sur toutes ces dimensions, le WOFI vient vraiment nourrir le positionnement et le travail de CGLU, notamment en matière de plaidoyer pour la décentralisation. Donc c'est une ressource qui est essentielle pour CGLU, mais également pour diversité d'acteurs, comme on a pu le voir dans les présentations qui viennent de se succéder. Et donc c'est une ressource qui, pour CGLU, doit être maintenue, renforcée, préservée pour plusieurs raisons. Et ça va me permettre aussi de résumer ce qui, de mon point de vue, caractérise ce qu'est l'Observatoire et donc pourquoi est-ce qu'on doit le préserver. La première dimension sur laquelle j'aimerais insister, c'est sur, je dirais, un rôle peut-être assez politique du WOFI, qui en soi, à travers les données qui sont disponibles, les analyses qui sont produites, c'est un rappel et une reconnaissance du rôle stratégique, du rôle clé des collectivités sur la scène internationale. Cette reconnaissance, elle a parfois du mal à être totalement reconnue et Isabelle, dans sa présentation, a rappelé des données qui sont importantes d'avoir en tête. La dernière édition, 135 pays couverts, on recense plus de 660 000 collectivités qui, dans le dernier rapport. En matière de dépenses publiques, les dépenses des collectivités, c'est 21,5% des dépenses publiques totales. En matière d'investissement, l'investissement public local, c'est 39% de l'investissement public total. Donc ce sont des chiffres qui viennent nous dire et nous rappeler à quel point il faut davantage peut-être associer, compter sur les collectivités, surtout dans un contexte où on fait face à une multitude de transitions et aucune transformation, aucun changement majeur ne peut avoir lieu sérieusement si on ne prend pas davantage en compte la place qui devrait revenir aux collectivités territoriales. Ensuite, un aspect qui caractérise aussi l'état d'esprit dans lequel nous travaillons avec l'OCDE, avec les partenaires, c'est qu'on a conçu, développé le WOFI comme un outil qui est au service de l'intérêt général. Donc ça, c'est une chose qui a déjà été dite par de nombreux intervenants. Le WOFI est conçu comme un bien commun, une ressource partagée avec des données qui sont accessibles à tous. Et donc, on est très heureux lorsque on constate à travers tous vos témoignages comment cet outil a pu vous servir et vous aider au quotidien, alors que vous venez d'horizons quand même assez différents. Donc voilà, c'est un outil qui contribue à l'enrichissement des connaissances, qui permet d'avoir une photographie de l'état des finances locales. Bon, il y a aussi tout un tas d'indicateurs qui sont développés, mais je n'ai pas le temps de développer cela. Vous dire aussi, rappeler, mais vous le savez tous, que c'est un projet qui est exigeant, tant sur le fond que sur la forme. Le travail de collecte des données est essentiel. Il nécessite un travail de terrain, de vérification, de comparaison. Et donc, cette dimension et cette rigueur permet d'assurer aussi la qualité des données qui sont produites. Et ça, c'est important. Redire aussi que le WOFI, on peut le caractériser aussi par sa souplesse et son adaptabilité. On vient de publier une 3e édition, donc c'est un projet qui est en constante évolution, qui produit des connaissances qui répondent à des enjeux et des préoccupations du moment. C'est pour ça que lors de la 3e édition, il y a eu un focus sur l'impact du Covid-19. Et bon, d'ores et déjà, pour la préparation de la 4e édition, nous commençons à réfléchir justement aux sujets qui devront être mis vraiment à l'honneur. Bon, on a déjà quelques idées, on pense notamment à la question du financement de la transition écologique, passer en revue les outils, les mécanismes, la place des collectivités. Et donc voilà, on sera très heureux de mener cette réflexion avec tous nos partenaires, parce que le WOFI, justement, c'est aussi un outil qui a une approche et qui met en place une dynamique qui est collective et à plusieurs étapes du projet. C'est-à-dire que très en amont, il y a des consultations, des discussions, des réflexions qui sont menées avec les partenaires pour qu'on puisse comprendre quels sont les enjeux en présence. Les différents partenaires sont associés à plusieurs étapes, que ce soit dans la conception, le suivi, ça peut être aussi ensuite lorsqu'il y a la phase de relecture. Donc voilà, toutes ces caractéristiques nous rappellent que on conçoit le WOFI comme un outil vraiment au service de l'intérêt général, donc avec une dynamique collective. Ça a été dit aussi par plusieurs intervenants, et c'est une dimension qu'on aimerait soulever à nouveau, c'est que c'est un outil qui influence les pratiques. Donc il y a quelques exemples qui ont été donnés. Donc en fournissant des données qui sont tangibles et des analyses, cela va aider, si vous voulez, les décideurs en fait, à mieux cibler leur action. Ça peut être pour une agence, pour une banque, hein, ça a été rappelé par Elisa Musini, pour des agences de développement, pour des chercheurs. Bon voilà, il y a tout un tas d'acteurs qui peuvent tirer ce bénéfice-là. Tout à l'heure, Elton a parlé de pression positive. C'est vrai que le WOFI peut aussi créer une émulation, en tout cas positive, parce que les éléments de comparaison permettent aussi d'accélérer parfois l'action. Et ça, c'est important. Et en ce sens, ça donne une dimension d'autant plus concrète et opérationnelle à tout ce travail qui est mené. Ça informe aussi les dirigeants et les décideurs sur les réformes qui sont en cours. Et donc, ça peut être aussi là une source d'information. Donc c'est aussi un outil, le WOFI, qui facilite la coopération internationale. Et ça, c'est important. Donc autant pendant la phase de collecte de données, donc ça implique aussi tout un travail parmi les partenaires pour faciliter les mises en relation. Donc c'est vraiment un espace qui permet aussi donc, de nourrir ce dialogue de façon permanente et d'encourager justement les mises en relation aussi lorsque c'est nécessaire. Enfin, la dernière dimension sur laquelle j'aimerais revenir, qui nous paraît aussi importante, le WOFI, c'est un outil qui renforce la transparence et la responsabilité. Ça, c'est un point qui est important, c'est-à-dire qu'avec toutes ces données qui sont donc accessibles au plus grand monde, ça permet par exemple aux citoyens de mieux comprendre comment est-ce que l'argent public est dépensé, quels sont les secteurs prioritaires. Donc ça permet aussi de renforcer l'adhésion. Alors hier, on a parlé dans l'une des sessions de la question du consentement à l'impôt, donc ça c'est un point important et en ce sens, peut considérer que les travaux du WOFI permettent d'une certaine manière de renforcer aussi la démocratie locale et de participer aussi à la bonne gouvernance, d'encourager l'innovation et donc les pratiques les plus exemplaires. Donc aujourd'hui, on est dans une phase de transition où on prépare la 4e édition qui sera lancée à partir du mois de janvier prochain. Toujours donc dans ce même état d'esprit, donc avec une dynamique collective qui s'adapte et puis toujours aussi ce rôle et cette nécessité de rappeler, je veux insister là-dessus, le rôle clé des collectivités pour réussir toutes les transitions, tous les défis qui nous attendent parce que sans une implication vraiment pleine et entière, résolue des collectivités territoriales, on aura du mal à réussir tous les défis qui nous attendent. Donc voilà ce que je voulais partager avec vous.
Merci à tous nos partenaires.
Et merci, bien évidemment, à tous nos partenaires. On compte sur vous pour la suite et on ne manquera pas de vous tenir informés. Ce projet, de toute façon, ne peut pas exister sans l'implication de nos partenaires. Donc, bien sûr qu'on remercie vivement. Merci à tous.
Très bien, merci beaucoup. Merci à tous pour avoir participé aux panélistes. Merci aussi à ceux qui sont en ligne. Je me suis laissé dire qu'on avait même Serge Alou qui a été très actif dans le WOFI qui était en ligne. Donc, merci. Bonjour Serge. Et puis, voilà. Félicitations à tous. Merci.
Fantastic. So thank you for that panel. So if people agree, I'm looking at Nan as well, do we have to go for a coffee break now, or can we chat for half an hour and then the coffee will still be there? So do people agree that we do that? We just chat for half an hour to close things up and then we go for a coffee? If anybody strongly disagrees, please say so now. Great. So I'm going to next give the microphone to our UCLG colleagues, just for a couple of reflections, and then we'll kind of, maybe everybody has an opportunity to share a couple of reflections. In particular, are there any thoughts that they have on each of the sessions, or any of the sessions they want to pick? One or two things to take forwards, either an aspirational vision, like there should be, I don't know, one huge mega fund for cities or something like that, or something we can concretely do in the next 12 months, like a very concrete policy objective to be argued for at a specific meeting that is coming up, for example, at the COP. What do we want to do with local and intergovernmental fiscal transfers? So either, or you couldn't say both, an aspirational vision or and a policy objective for the next 12 to 18 months. And then what we will do after the conference is we will circulate for each of the sessions, what are the aspirational visions? You know, do we want the WUFI to be produced every 2 weeks and emails to everybody in the world kind of thing? That's an aspirational vision. But for each of the sessions, what are the aspirational visions and what are the next steps that we want to take forward as a coalition of the committed, essentially? I mean, this is not an institution, it's just a coalition. So during this wrap-up session, we'll give the floor to all the partners, FMDV, but we're going to start with Paloma from UCLG. Any thoughts from your side, Paloma?
Thank you very much, David. Yes, I think, hello everyone. So I think overall, I would just like to say, first of all, that going back a bit to the overarching objective of this conference, which was to try to find the way to shape the ecosystem, the global financial ecosystem, for it to work for cities, local and regional governments. This really is based on the fact that we are all convinced, and I think we all have we share the main values that we need to work towards this system. From UCLG, just to recall that we believe local and regional governments are, and we know that they are, the basic political actors that really represent and sustain representative democracy at its core. So this gives them the political legitimacy to be on the forefront of implementing all kinds of action to help out their communities. So based on this, we really want local and regional governments to be considered and acknowledged at the level they should be, especially in the governance of the global financial ecosystem, so that they can access the financing that they need, but also that they can have a seat at the table and be able to shape this ecosystem together with all of the other stakeholders. So at this kind of conference as well, we should continue to promote the presence of more local and regional governments that could be here to tell their story directly, which is what we've tried to have in each panel, and we could continue to foster this. And also another small reflection is that throughout this conference, well, we looked at some concrete tools based on laying out the 5 policy areas of the Malaga agenda. And although each of these concrete tools and mechanisms that help us advance one step at a time this the building of the financial ecosystem that works for local, regional governments. We also need to always look at the global picture and try to take a step back. So I think that's what we want to do now, and really understand that each of the 5 elements link to each other, that they managing to improve one policy area will nourish another, and we are hoping for a virtuous cycle where each of the elements can nourish and strengthen the other. So that's the links we are trying to find, and if we could even summarize it in one sentence, well, I would say that strong capacity of local governments to collect own source revenues can allow them also to have a sound public management of the fiscal transfers that they receive. This enables them also to enter on the capital market and have access to additional financing at the international level, and this can be backed up with guarantees and the support from certain investment funds. So we really need to have this global picture. And to also close a bit this intervention with what we heard in the introduction from our Secretary General of UCLG, Emilia Saiz, I would say that in order to understand that the change in this financial ecosystem doesn't only require the small building blocks, each of the concrete tools, but also a change in the way we understand, well, development, or that a change in values, basically, a redefinition of what it means to finance projects. And from UCLG, we're convinced that if we include in our value systems the care and feminist approach, it allows us to have a way to finance things that really works for the people and the planet and the government, whereby we will ensure that all policies and projects are people-centered. They are also respectful of human rights, respectful for the planet, and so that's why we encourage for this wider change of values based on the feminist and care approach. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That's a really great contribution from UCLG, and it kind of sets the scene for the next one. So let's go to each session. So who, either one of the participants or one of the people that asked a question, or just anybody except anybody on this table here, would like to contribute to what's a key takeaway from the first session for them? I'm not looking at anybody in particular. Sophie, perhaps? Can you activate the mic?
Thank you. I don't know if it's a key takeaway. I thought we were also looking for follow-up actions from my side, linking to the opening session with the ministerial declaration that was, I think, mentioned by Carlos, and also the reference to the first local climate summit, plus other events at COP. I think there is, work we can do to follow up concretely to try to advance the agenda. What we discussed here. I mean, that's of course one particular angle only on climate, but COP28 is upon us, so I'd like to take that one with partners here. Thanks.
Anybody else on the first session? Like any key takeaway that they want to register? Jesper?
Thank you very much. I think in addition to what Sophie said, I think some of the key takeaways from the first session is that there is both a need to focus on the overall system of finance and the intergovernmental fiscal transfers, and there are different objectives which needs to be targeted holistically. So there's a wider reform agenda which we need to support in all our work. And then there are more specific quick wins, and I will actually call the climate finance a quick win, because something we can do very quickly and something where we already have the trust that local government can handle fund in the area of climate change. We just need to advocate more for that. So that's a quick win. But at the same time, we also need to look at the overall funding system and ensure that the longer haul in terms of the various components of the grant systems are working very well together. And we also discussed there that one system will not fit all. There will need to be a combination of different grant instruments. They all have their objectives. But it's basically also a way to build up the trust in local governments. There is skepticism from central government side that local governments will not be able to handle the funds. So we need also to strengthen the monitoring systems, the performance assessment systems, so that there's that trust that the additional funding can be handled effectively and targeted. So I think these are just some additional comments, but I agree with Sophie that in terms of quick wins, the climate area is an area where we can use as a stepping stone to mobilize more funding for subnational government here in the next 2 to 3 years, which will be extremely important here now.
Really clear. So we have the 23 ministers that have signed a declaration that intergovernmental fiscal transfers are a vehicle for climate finance. No, thank you. So we have the declaration of the 23 ministers that have signed, this declaration that intergovernmental fiscal transfers will be a vehicle for climate finance. And then that's a quick win. And then we have the more detailed points that we will write up. And that can be, we can circulate as an initial takeaway, both an initial policy win and something for the future, particularly the interconnection, I think, between the different elements that Jesper mentioned. Now, what about the second session? But please stop me if anybody has a burning takeaway from the first one. So in the terms of the second session, own source revenue, and building on what's been said about the first session, the interrelationship between the different elements, it's not one size fits all. You need to trust local governments, which was another point that Jesper mentioned. So how does that relate to own source revenue? Does anybody have any key takeaway from that session? I don't know, maybe there's a gentleman in a white shirt over there who might have something to say on it. Perhaps.
I was hoping you wouldn't put me on the spot, David. I was hoping you were referring to Dimitri, but I think there were quite a few key takeaways. I'm not sure which one I would want to highlight, as I would want to do justice to not just kind of put forward the key points that I like to make, but do justice to what was said in the session. Maybe just off the top of my head, something that kind of sticks to my mind is the size of the gap that we experience in many of these local governments. I think the statistics that was used in the session was from Jane on Kenya, or actually Dimitri, referring to a study from the Commission for Revenue Allocation in Kenya, which found that the median local government or county government in Kenya has a gap of 95% of OSR. If you consider that, if you consider what we heard today about the fact that there's probably more of a funding gap than a financing gap in this space overall, and the fact that some of the solutions to improving OSR are quite apparent and actually easy to implement, I think it makes a pretty strong case for us to work on OSR as one of the priority areas for us to move forward in this space. I'll think of a few more takeaways, but I'll pass the mic on to Dimitri in the meantime.
Thank you so much, Lenia. A couple of points, and they're probably a general one and go beyond just roundtable 2. One is that the issue of own source revenues should be considered and treated in the broader context of public financial management. And as we are talking about mobilizing own source revenues or mobilizing any other type of finance to that matter, we should not forget about the expenditure side of public financial management. If you remember, that was one of the points that we need to think about, the allocative and productive efficiency. And this may be a significant resource for local governments to increase their fiscal space and to save own source revenues. The second issue, the second takeaway, again, more general, I believe, was the issue of data availability. We spoke about it in the context, of course, of tax databases, but the issue is bigger than this, and the last roundtable just spoke about the importance of financial data. As we have discovered, there is a dearth of statistical information at the city level. And when we are talking about, say, own source revenue and tax databases, the major reason is lack of data about city economies. It's not so much taxpayers' database. It's the state of the city's economy that is often not known, and therefore the potential of that economy, also in terms of own source revenues, but in terms of the overall capacity to deliver goods and services, is not known for sure. And it's difficult for city leaders to come with informed decisions. So this is it.
Well, that's very clear. Anybody else would like to add something to that, what we've heard so far from this session? I think the revelation that it's a funding gap as much as a financing gap is a huge revelation. So that is a big thing, I think, that we will come out of this, starting to change the narrative a little bit. Jamie?
There was another graph from the second session that piqued my interest, and that was the examples of own source revenue growth in Kenya by county for those that had engaged with the controller of budget. And it showed, if I recall, and I don't recall exactly the numbers, that there were some that had increased 15% in own source revenue year to year, and there were some that, I believe 4 out of the 20 or so that were on the table, that had actually declined. However, that year there was an inflation rate in Kenya of about 7%. If I recall the graph correctly, if you adjust for inflation, we would have roughly half of the counties with an increase in revenue and half of the counties with actually a decrease in revenue, half and half. Not 16-4, but 10-10. What's that? Own source revenue growth, even though with attention from high officials in this room, is a roll of the dice. If you have politicians who want to do something and they're willing to invest, they'll do something, and the other half doesn't. If that's what you're going to pin your hope on, and this is indeed one of the two funding sources to leverage the finance, and this is the smaller bit, but still, if this is the one that you're going to pin your hope on, good luck. Right? That's the reality. The other thing that I think that implies is that, is this a technical problem or is this a political problem? We had some very good contributions that, you know, in Kenya, the county governments, they run the water utility. They have the list of all the payees. It's a simple Excel spreadsheet matching. There's no need, I think, for an international mission to tell them how to increase their revenues. This is a political decision. And this is one of the top 2 or 3 countries in Africa where governors are empowered to hire and fire, and they have all the incentives. I don't even want to go onto a rant about all the other countries where the local governments are so weakly empowered they don't even care to collect revenue. So if in the second best or in the best case scenario, you have a chance of 50-50 of succeeding, I would just, you know, think, what is the root cause? Revenue collection or weakness is a proximate cause. of lack of development at the local level, lack of funding for development. I think it would be very, very important to keep on going back to that root cause. And why is that the case? And if that is political, what can you do about that, if anything? I hate to be a negative Nancy on this one, but those what the numbers, right? We have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. This is the evidence that was presented to us. We have to kind of take that evidence seriously. So, thank you.
No, thank you, Jamie. That's very clear. I mean, there's a great book by somebody called Judith Tendler that was written about municipal finance in Brazil, and she did a survey of about 4,000 of these Brazilian municipalities. There's so many of them. And she found out that the determining factor was leadership. Everything else didn't really matter. And that's essentially what you've just said, if you like. So that's a very important insight as well. So thank you, Jamie, for that. So anybody else want to comment? Shall we allow people second goes? Yeah, okay, just in your case.
Thank you. I didn't see any other burning intervention, so I just took the liberty to comment again. I fully agree, you know, on what was just said about the importance of politics and the lack of incentives in many parts, in many of the low-income countries, let's say, but in general for local governments to optimize OSR. But that shouldn't be a reason for us to throw up our hands and say, you know, this is not a technical issue. This is something that's in the world of politics that we cannot impact. We can change the incentives around OSR. That was part of the point that I was trying to make in the panel, is that we need to think more critically about the types of incentives that we are creating through the ecosystem for local governments. And you know, I just want to reference one anecdote that was made, I think, at dinner last night about Lamu, a county, again in Kenya, without wanting to refer too often to Kenya, but it's a rural county, I think, of 100,000 people, and it had a very poor OSR performance. Changed the governor, and then it had a very strong OSR performance. There's another county that had a very strong OSR performance. I think Laikipia was doing very well, changed governor, and then it was one of the worst performing counties in terms of OSR. The point here is that oftentimes we say there's a lack of local government capacity, but in the span, you know, when the administration changes, clearly the civil servants in charge of revenue didn't change. I mean, sometimes they may have, but in these cases they didn't. And so it just reinforces that idea that it's, you know, politics is key. And we really, when we talk about OSR reform, oftentimes I still feel as though our entry point is technical change, capacity building of local governments. They know what the problems are. They may not be able to build a perfect system, but most of the time we could have 80-20, we could fix most of the problems. But we really need to focus on strengthening incentives. There are a lot of options for doing that, but I think if that could be a key takeaway, that would be important.
I think that's clear. It's the leadership and the incentives, as you mentioned. I think that's very clear. Oh, please, Ben.
I just want to add a small thing that when we talk about capacity building for local governments, it would actually should include even giving them the enabling environment, including equipment and including where necessary actually supportive staff to help them. Because as somebody mentioned, these are organs of people's representatives, they are organs of democracy, they are organs of governance, and they are near the population. But many times no one thinks about it. You know, even these people get elected, they are in offices, you find a mayor or a governor, and maybe sometimes they are not given the equipment. I had an opportunity to visit the former President Obama when he was a senator in 2005. And I found an MP with an office, with researchers, with personal assistants. I found an office of an MP in the US is fully fledged. Forget about ministers. So I'm not saying that's what we should give to our local governments, but we should give something that really, if you have a mayor and his or her system, like the mayor we had yesterday, we should build the capacity of that mayor with equipment, with enabling environment, to enable them bring out their views and put them on the agenda. But the current arrangement, you just find an mayor in office, probably he or she is depending on the other general system that supports the whole government, a local government, and therefore that does not give him or her the right capacity to debate these things, to vote for development, to engage everybody and be able to deliver for us that part that we need from the subnational government. Thank you.
Very clear. So the need to equipment and support as part of the capacity building. That's very, very clear. Thank you. Anybody else? Jennifer?
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, so for me, one aspect that emerged from that session is the discussion around asset management, which we normally don't look at it so much. And even in the local governments, you know, they hardly talk about the assets that they have, you know, and how they can manage them. In most cases, they will be looking at maybe the computers, the tractors, you know, that they have in their yards. But they have a lot of assets, you know, under the ground. They have, you know, a lot of rivers that they can utilize. They have forests, they have land, which, you know, they can use as a factor of production or even help in promoting local economic development. So I think we need to look at this aspect more and give it, you know, that prominence that it requires for the local governments to look at it as another source of revenue. In the presentation, when they tried to sell items, I think, in Uganda, they did not attract market. You know, he mentioned so many items that were put on market, but I think they were in poor condition. The operations and maintenance was not done, including, I think, one market that was mentioned by the mayor, which has stayed 200 years and it's very old, and now she's appealing that we provide support to renovate that market. So it just shows that not much effort or thinking is put into the assets that exist in those local authorities. Thank you.
Really clear, Jennifer. It's really interesting you talk about markets and renovation of markets, because that could be a really good segue into the next session, unless anybody else has anything they want to say. No, we're in the closing. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Don't worry, I will not talk too long. No, I think there is a blind point here also. It's the kind of taxes that are devolved to the local governments. I think we cannot go on with this conversation on own source revenues if we don't re-question the tradition of what is usually allocated to the local governments in terms of management of local taxes and the engineering and the innovation that we could bring apart from the asset management and valorization. This is a key component. We cannot go with what we used to do. So it's a very strong question and we need to better discuss this point.
No, that's a really good point, the devolved taxes and innovative new types of taxes. There's some local governments are experimenting with these micro taxes that you don't even feel it when you're paying it, and you can use digital phones for that, you know, like a 1 cent tax on a certain transaction, like a micro tax. So thank you, that's a really useful intervention. Anything else on own source revenue? So if not, then let's go to the next session, which was financing culture, inclusive and gender responsive urban services and infrastructure. And you also mentioned markets, Jennifer. And I think there was an idea that I heard to think about markets as some way of regenerating culture, inclusive, of dealing with this issue as well. I don't know if you want to mention anything like that, Samina, perhaps, not putting many words in your mouth. Over to you.
Thank you, David. Definitely, I think we talked about looking at the cultural assets and creating this new way of local development finance, cities finance, and how we can, add on this qualitative aspects of enhanced culture and music and whatnot. So for me, just I think a few takes away, and maybe Gordon, if you want to add as well. We did talk about, gender financing is one part, but gender financing has to be linked to specific sectors which are so important to promote gender equality and women's economic empowerment. So I think that link is very important, and looking at the potential of bringing in large investments in those sectors. And then also link it to addressing the structural barriers. That's important, because just investments is not going to make any difference unless their structural impediments are addressed. I think that was important. And then we did talk about leadership as in mayors and heads of governments, but I think we did talk about leadership at all levels for female, so that there's equal participation in decision making. I think that was the point. And then enriching cities with culture. I think that's it's an interesting area, and I think there was a lot of learning with coming out of our work. But just looking beyond economic development and quality of life with bringing assets linked to culture, arts, and music. How do we can create that kind of ecosystem? I think that's important, that came out. And just generally, like for cities, how do we create these financing structures that leave no one behind? I think that was the message that coming out. So, you want to add anything, Gordon, maybe?
Well, I think for me, as I said yesterday, being the newcomer to the bunch, looking at the cross between the political aspects and the technical aspects, it seems there's a bit of, I wouldn't say disconnect, but there's just a lot of issues. And I think maybe those political concerns can be more aligned with some of the responses that you guys have technically, that would help move things along in those areas.
Very clear. So aligning the political and technical concerns, that's very clear. And then enriching cities with culture, and culture as a vehicle for economic development. But some other points were raised during that session as well. I remember, I think, Mohammed, you made a point about how it's not just the small investments, that nowadays even the mega projects, we should consider, it's a must that there's a gender dimension to the mega projects too. It shouldn't be marginalized as a small issue, small ticket size issue. I think that's something that came out of that session as well. Anything else that we got from that session? Anybody recalls or would like to highlight? Yeah, please go ahead.
Bon, en fait, je voudrais revenir sur les ressources propres des collectivités locales. Pour nous, c'est les ressources les plus importantes et qui vont faciliter la mobilisation de toutes les autres ressources. Et dans ce cadre, il y a un certain nombre d'éléments sur lesquels je pense qu'il faut insister. On a parlé d'abord le renforcement des capacités des collectivités locales, notamment en les dotant des ressources humaines et des services appropriés, capables de préparer ou en tout cas d'aider les décideurs des collectivités locales à avoir une vision claire sur leurs propres ressources, notamment en le dotant des bases de données essentielles. Le recensement des ressources des contribuables, pour nous, c'est essentiel pour cela. Maintenant, l'une des pratiques aujourd'hui qui a permis à beaucoup de communes d'augmenter les ressources propres, c'est la digitalisation. On a vu dans un certain nombre de pays après avoir recensé les contribuables et les dotés d'équipements dématérialisés pour collecter les impôts, ça a multiplié par des taxes, hein, ça a multiplié par 10, 20 dans beaucoup de communes. Et là, ça a entraîné un effet puisque ça a permis à ces collectivités locales d'emprunter, puisque ça les a donné des ressources propres qui leur permettent de rembourser des crédits. Un autre point important, c'est la question de redevabilité. C'est comment impliquer les populations à l'utilisation des dépenses. D'abord, dans le cadre de l'élaboration du budget, il faut impliquer les habitants dans le choix des projets. Une fois que les populations sont assurées que les montants des recettes payées vont contribuer effectivement à l'amélioration de leurs conditions de vie, dans ce cadre qu'on parle le budget participatif, en affectant une partie des montants des recettes propres au quartier, en disant bon, 20% du budget de la commune sera consacré au volet aux dépenses décidées par la population elle-même, et cela peut nécessairement contribuer à la mobilisation de ressources. Voilà quelques pistes pour nous qui nous semblent être importantes. Bien entendu, je dis la question des ressources humaines pour aider les collectivités, les maires à avoir une ingénierie financière, à préparer le budget, à définir les assiettes, parce que ce qui se passe en général, les assiettes fiscales sont définies par l'État. Quand je prends par exemple pour le cas en Guinée, et du coup, quand c'est une recette partagée, si je prends par exemple des taxes foncières, un maire n'a aucun moyen de dire aux services fiscaux de l'État combien il a droit, parce qu'il n'a pas su constituer une base de données réelle de ses contribuables pour pouvoir discuter avec les services financiers. Ce qui fait que il faut vraiment forcément doter les collectivités locales des services capables de les aider à préparer leur budget, les recettes et puis l'assiette fiscale. Voilà quelques éléments que je voulais rajouter par rapport à la question des ressources propres. Et puis, pour nous, après, une fois que cela peut permettre aux collectivités locales d'assurer le fonctionnement de leurs infrastructures et aussi d'engager des dépenses, ils peuvent à la fois demander à l'État de compléter ou aux banques ou s'adresser aux capitaux, au marché des capitaux pour compléter. Mais sans cela, ça va être très compliqué pour les communes de mobiliser d'autres ressources. Merci.
Well, thank you. That's a very clear set of issues that came out. Thank you for bringing up digitization. We'd missed that one. And the kind of contract between the citizen and the local governments, the kind of social contracts involving people and they will pay. I think that's very important too. And also maybe even looking at revenue sharing and local setting of taxes and those elements you brought up. So thank you. That's very helpful. And the database too. So we got those points all noted. So I think we've dealt with yesterday. Does anybody have anything that they feel we're missing in terms of, from their perspective, key lessons from yesterday? Jennifer?
I think there was one major action: solve the problems of women, and you would have solved the problems of this world. So anyway, we need to support women. That message came out very clearly. And also for me, the issue of tools. You know, there are so many tools that we can use. I saw the Her City toolbox. With so many tools inside that box that we can borrow and apply somewhere else. The issue of participation, encouraging, community participation to ensure there is social cohesion and building of the social fabric to avoid, conflicts so that people live in peace and harmony, and they enjoy, you know, good life, life that is stress-free. And when you look at the things that were presented as examples, they are not very expensive undertakings. You know, they don't require a lot of money. Like, for example, to have a zebra crossing, it doesn't require a lot of money. A council can buy a tin of paint and, you know, make those demarcations. So you realize that in this area, you know, the interventions are not that very expensive, but they create a lot of impact.
Now, that is a very good point. We mustn't forget Harry Belafonte and that piece of wisdom in there. Plus, and I think you see this in all cities, the, you know, global north, global south. It's not that expensive to make a big difference. And maybe it comes back a little bit to that leadership element as well. You see it when you go from city to city. You can sometimes tell if the mayor or if the administration is on top of it or not. That's really clear. So let's get these points in, and I think the own source revenue is the place to put that. That's one perhaps about, because it comes to public financial management, as was said earlier, and solve the problem of women, and you solve the problem of the world. That will be a key takeaway, I think, from that session. So now coming on to today, if we go to the first session of today, we looked at city-friendly investment funds. Now, a lot of the people, including one of the managers of a city-friendly investment fund, is no longer here. So we can, you know, those that are remaining in the room from that session, what do you feel were the key takeaways from that session? And that was a very enlightening session. What do you feel we got from it? A PS? Sorry? Oh, right.
Sorry, David, I'm here behind you. But I think in terms of the main takeaways and what was discussed on the difference between financing, funding, we are definitely on the financing discussions. I think I will basically raise, like, at least mine, 3 takeaways. One, there's still a huge need while discussing financing of TA. This was raised by Celine, thinking on the private sector, by ICLE, by many. Like, we still need a lot of support on that front. I think I heard also, particularly from Ben, on concessional finance, how still this is very much needed, and how blended finance mechanisms, so still talking about returns when we're trying to engage, for example, private sector investment, but trying to diminish risks on that front. And I think, like, we had a big discussion about what is the actual role of the private sector, and then my conclusion is also, like, how can we discuss and engage with private sector, considering their different approaches and, like, their different structures, and not taking the private sector as just one big entity, but like working on the complexity of that, and that actually everyone needs to be engaged. So I think that's a bit my takeaways. But
thank you, really clear. And I think, you know, the financing and funding, and then the funding of the TA, or the financing of the TA as well. You know, how do we actually get money into the TA, and the role of the private sector, really clear. And I thought we had the offer, so let's put this on the table in the conclusions. We had the offer to do this taxonomy of, you know, maybe some kind of table of what is appropriate for what kind of fund, and what kind of funding or what kind of financing. And we had that offer from Salim from Meridian, so let's take him up on that and try to work something out, which might be a nice product to have together with them. Thank you, Patricia. Anybody else?
Yeah, maybe I can come in. So there are actually few takeaways. In addition to that important element, the second one is that the private sector is not the solution for everything. I mean, the funds, the financing mechanisms in place are also there to tackle specific types of projects, not all projects. So, and as such, it doesn't necessarily mean that the private sector is the solution for development. All the other panels and all the concerns of increased public funding for infrastructure development, basic services, and that actually very much comes handy with this issue of funding versus financing is the evidence of that. So we have to have an increased awareness and advocacy at all platforms. When we are talking about city-friendly investment funds, what does it mean? For what purpose? Raising expectations that cannot be met need to be also mitigated, because if we are to be serious about development, we have to understand it is financing development, but development is for what? It's really it's a human right and an issue at the end of the day, right? It's about inclusion. It's about my right to have access to service. It's my right to be included in a process, and that one the private sector is not going to solve. So let's focus on the element of finance for what it's meant to do. That's the first takeaway. The second one, we don't have enough partnerships. I think we are still, in a way, tackling problems from different angles. And there has to be a call for increased partnerships and plus more organization and partnerships in order to benefit from partner strength in certain areas to complement others. Otherwise, the economies of scale actually becomes very expensive and unachievable in many ways. So and that pretty much comes to the issue of technical assistance. There's a lot of drive from many partners to support in that field, but a coordinated manner in terms of pipeline intelligence, in terms of city readiness, in terms of what exactly the cities would require for the projects of pipelines to come to investment readiness, that can be actually solved by increased partnerships as well. And you actually maximize the donor resources, you maximize public resources through this approach. So there's a call here to strengthen the Málaga Coalition, to increase partnerships, to look at those very important factors. And my third takeaway from the session is simply, let's not also ignore that the private sector are at the end of the day, they're going to be looking for investable projects with return. So the pipeline development process, structuring the projects to meet specific requirements of the funds is critical. And to that end, there's no one fund out there. There has to be a variety of financing mechanisms, a variety of funds available out there in order to meet the best, let's say, financing solution for the projects that are being developed. So I guess from the Málaga Coalition, there has to, the funds that we have, created, UCLG, FMDV, UNCDF, which is the IMF, it's one demonstration effect. UCLG Africa is coming with another demonstration effect. There are other funds out there that are trying to be city-friendly and play the demonstration effect, but that's not enough. We have to look at the whole spectrum of financing, from domestic resource mobilization and domestic banks, for example, and domestic financing mechanisms to come in place, how to utilize pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, etc., to come in and be part of the process of financing development, and then other international financiers that they can be intrigued by the progress and the process that can come out of these demonstration effects that we're trying to show. So again here, another call for action is to increase basically advocacy for what these funds are trying to do. That's the permanent secretaries.
Really, really clear. This is all being recorded, by the way, so we're getting everything that's being said, and there will be a transcript that we'll use. So this is very clear. Ben, thank you very much, Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you. I just have three things which I got as takeaway. One is that there are some financing products that are available there. They may not be very friendly, but those with courage can go for them. For example, as I said, for housing, affordable housing projects and markets, we are ready to engage because we've tested it out. The second takeaway is that private capital needs to be restructured from bankability or bankable to financeable transformative. Otherwise, remain two worlds. Public investment, like in local governments, will look at it and they will never meet. So that restructuring is necessary. And the third point is that, like government gives private investors tax holidays, I think it's time now for private groups or private capital to give government profit-making holidays so that we meet somewhere. So once in a while, it's part of social corporate responsibility. We can engage and then surrender part of the profit margin and invest into urban cities as part of addressing SDGs, addressing these people to also get a good environment, like we saw what was shown to us yesterday afternoon, those changes that Jennifer was talking about. That kind of investment is necessary. Thank you.
Really clear, profit-making holidays. I like that one. Lenny?
I'm not an expert on the external finance side so much, but I found today's two panels to be very interesting, and there are two key points for me that that I really will remember clearly. And the first one is the one that, you know, Celine made when it kind of struck up a bit of controversy, although he didn't say anything controversial at all. He was just clarifying the difference between finance and funding. And of course, all of us in the room are aware of that difference, but then he said it because I think overall in the discourse around these things, these confusions are still quite commonplace. And, you know, we speak about finance as though there is a free lunch. And, you know, we want to attract private finance as though people are willing to just give their money for free. But of course, they expect return on investment. And I think it's really important to make that distinction because it will force us to be more clear as to where it's really realistic for us to be able to secure private finance and focus on the commercial, you know, which sectors, which types of projects are really will be able to generate revenues that will be able to be financeable at the end of the day. And the second point that, and so I think just on that first point, so I think it's important for us to spend more time debunking this kind of misconception to some extent of the finance and funding in the development discourse. I know in the UN, we often just, you know, naively speak about, yeah, let's bring on board private finance without really understanding where this is realistic at all, and thereby really misconstruing problems, generating false expectations, and not being very helpful in this quest to bridging the financing or the funding gap. And the second point for me is that we really need to be more strategic in where we use public funding in the context of blended finance, etc., to crowd in private investment. Clearly, we can engage in financial engineering and come up with all kinds of complex structures that would ultimately probably allow any kind of project to be financeable if we just throw in all of the financial engineering that we can think of. But we need to get to, I think we need to better understand where is it strategic for us to use public resources with the aim of bringing about a particular project. You know, there are trade-offs. And what, is there some kind of rule of thumb or some kind of intelligence that we can generate for us to say, you know what, if we need to use this amount of public funding, it's probably not worth it for us to engage in this, probably not worth it for us to try to make it financeable. So, yeah, thanks.
That's also very clear statements, Lenny. I think, I mean, in UNCDF, we always talk about mechanisms, not projects, and we try not to put all our eggs in one just project if it's only going to be that project. but is that project going to be a demonstration that will create a mechanism which is then self-sustaining to lead to more? And I think that's a really good point you're making. The Tanga bond we heard about, there's a lot of effort gone into that. If that creates a bond market in Tanzania, then maybe it was worth it. If it's only done once and it's never repeated ever again, then one can ask the question, was that the right use of those funds? So I think it's really about how you create things that can be then replicated. It's a really good point. Thank you for that. So that's also recorded. So anybody else on the first session of today, the city-friendly investment funds? Please, Esther.
Yeah, just really very briefly, because everything has been already said. So just my takeaways, of course, the funding financing question, but what I also found interesting to spend a bit of time with what is really city-friendly. And we at ICLEI, working with local governments, we really respect their demand. We really work with them developing projects based on their demands. But then we somehow have to tailor and squeeze it into the different funding opportunities. So which are then not necessarily what they really need, but this is what an investor would think investable. So we tailor it. So I mean, I think it's also something we have to a bit do more thinking and somehow to bring these two levels closer to each other, that somehow to find a compromise. And then the other thing, what I really do believe, and it's also based on experience, and I mentioned also during the session, that I very much believe in the one-stop shop approach. So technical assistance is very, very important. I mean, we all agree on that. But then it really has to be followed up with investment opportunities, because otherwise we just leave the cities in a vacuum after the technical assistance ends. So I think this is something that is also a city and climate-friendly investment fund.
Really clear. Thank you very much, Esther. That's very clear. So please, go ahead.
Thank you. No, I would like just to make a brief comment, building also on what was mentioned earlier about the long-term sustainability of the TA and the need to bring in investments and so on. It's really great to see how rich this area is for great ideas. Maybe one element that could be much more considered also from development actors, there's a lot of development aid flowing in developing countries, but on a good part of that, local governments, they don't have much say, or they don't have a say at all. So it would, and this is development aid, and a good part of it is investment aid and so on. So it would be good to put local governments in the driving seat and have them have a bigger say in how this funding is allocated from international development partners to central governments, and then how and if any of it would actually flow and be managed by local governments directly. That's the best way to build capacities, and that's the best way to ensure sustainability over the long term, and to capacitate local governments so that they can apply for the very modern blended instruments and so on in different parts of the world. We are implementing this very nice project called EU for Municipalities. It's funded by the European Union. And basically it gives grants to local governments, up to 70% of which goes for investments, and up to 30% has to go for good governance initiatives and capacity building initiatives carried out by the municipalities themselves. So they are in the driving seat. They are leading the show, of course with support, external support and so on, but they are managing the investment component on their own, and like this, building capacities on how to absorb and manage donor assistance, and also they are leading the work in building the capacity in the areas that they need more, and in the ways that they can do that. And I think that's really great as a model to ensure much more sustainability of these actions. Otherwise, it's you fly in, throw the money, you fly out, and hope that something will remain. So that would be my 2 cents, very briefly. Thank you.
No, thank you. That's a very good point. And you heard Emilia, I think, and Carlos also mentioned this, and it's the reason why Emilia is not here today, is that she's been working on this advisory council of mayors now, which advises the Secretary General. And one of the things the Málaga Coalition will do will be feed topics into that process and feed topics into the, what's called the Global Task Force of Regional and Local Governments, which also sits parallel to the UN General Assembly. So I think there could be space to increase, to provide more, because local governments are always saying, yeah, we want a voice, but to do what? And maybe there could be space from the Málaga Coalition, from this meeting, to be able to say, we want a voice to do a few things, and that would be, I think that would help a lot, and maybe change the way that aid is organized. I mean, the Local program is one example of explicitly local government climate finance. Maybe there can be explicitly local government ways of delivering on other things too. No, that's really clear. Thank you for that. So anybody else would like to comment on we're still on the city-friendly investment funds. If not, what about the guarantee facility for cities? I know Lars has left, but that was also an extremely rich discussion and very technical. What were the key takeaways from that? Apart from the moderator, is anybody else left from that discussion? So we're over there, and then we'll come to you next, Jaffa. Yeah, please.
Thank you. And I think this question is also linked to the previous session, and I thought I should bring it at this level. What I took away is that if any subnational government worked in any financial institutions to borrow, they won't. Reason that they will not tick the boxes for the 5 C's. In banking, they always consider the 5 C's: cash, collateral, capital, character. The subnationals won't tick any of those boxes. If they tick 1 or 2, but the rest they'll fall. So the financial institution want to grant the loan. Secondly, most of our laws allows local governments actually to borrow, but it's just diplomatic provisions in the laws, in the actual sense that the legal requirements and processes are prohibitive. Politically, it's also not selling because there is no political regime that wants to commit the other. So the question is, what's the way forward, or what's the window of opportunity? The window of opportunity we have, from what was discussed yesterday, actually there are 2. One, I liked the municipal bonds, which have revenue streams. And I think we got an example, was this Tanzania, where they have issued a municipal bond on a water facility. It is a service provision. At the same time, it is revenue generating for the council. To me, I would love to study that more. 2, the other window of opportunity is the public-private partnership. If we can attract private capital to address our infrastructure needs in subnational government, it will be the way to go to address most of the issues. But what is the sufficient conditions for us to have municipal bonds and PPs? One, I think the Málaga Coalition should focus on capacity building. And this one should be capacity building by doing, so that subnational governments have in-house capacity to do financial engineering and also to do financial structuring for these projects, for the municipal bonds and the PP. It's the best window that I think I can see that is sustainable, that we should take away from here. Thank you.
That's also very helpful. Thank you. Please go ahead to your left.
I think for me the takeaway, and this was not just from that session, but maybe sort of bringing it together, I would start by quoting the late Jane Jacob, who said that if a metropolitan economy is working well, it is constantly transforming many poor people into middle-class people,
many illiterates into skilled people, and many greenhorns into competent citizens. And she concluded by saying that cities don't lure the middle class, they create it. Why am I saying this? Because if cities are working well, then it means they're great, and I said this, you said it's a public good. If cities are working well, they can be a great source of transformation. But from that session, we realized that based on the funding gap which we had seen from the OSR session, it means that unless we do the reforms that would put our cities or municipalities in a level where they can access funding and financing, we're likely to leave so many cities behind. And in leaving so many cities behind, we leave so many people behind. So my view is that from Málaga, what we need to do is, for those many municipalities, for instance, in Africa that don't qualify for financing in the capital markets, have so many OSR programs, I think maybe UNCLG should just think about a pack of reforms that would simply begin walking the journey with these cities. Otherwise, leaving these cities behind from these huge financial markets, from huge OSR potential, is simply leaving so many people behind. Thank you.
No, thank you. That was really interesting comment about creation of the middle class. I really like that comment. And the previous comment as well about the lessons of the bonds and the PPPs, in particular the bonds, because that's quite interesting as well in its own right. It's 100% local currency. And, you know, it's a country which is quite indebted. So Tanzania itself, there's the leadership of the president to say we want to do this and use it to recycle our domestic capital, not go to international markets. So there's a lot of lessons, I think, coming out of this. It's very interesting that I was at a recent meeting at the UNGA that was talking about some of these topics. Not the CCFL, no, not the CCFLA one, just in case Priscilla think I mean that one, but a different one. And it was all about, let's just get lots of bankable projects and that will solve everything. And it's quite interesting, the richness of this discussion here. It's very different from some of the narrative that was taking place at the UNGA. The CCFLA meeting was also a very good meeting that looked at the distinction between these different elements of the private sector. And there were some other very good meetings, but not all of them. And so I think we have a lot to offer to this debate. So now we come on to the penultimate session on guarantees. Oh, please, it's yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I've been reflecting on what I was hearing. And I got to the point where I said, my takeaway here is like, we are being left behind. Why do I say so? And this is in respect to the guarantees. Now, guarantees in our local law in Kenya are part of public debt. The situation with our public debt is quite bad as it is right now. Because, let me say, these are problems in the past. They have not necessarily just happened. Now, that being the case, and given that guarantees form part of the public debt, what then can be done in terms of helping out, or at least advising on the way forward in terms of more borrowing? Do we just abandon those who can't catch up, or is there something that can be done to help us? So it's a question. I don't think it has an easy answer, but it does affect the guarantees.
It certainly does. So let me turn to somebody who's always got the answers. Jaffa? Very good question.
Yeah. Thank you. So from our side, I wrote down a few. I think the one which really stood out for me is you can fix a market failure with a government intervention, but you cannot fix a government failure with a financial intervention. And therefore, the guarantee should not be seen as an instrument to fix what is underlying issues within the government perspective. I thought that really aligned the policy discussion of the limitedness of structured finance into the local government infrastructure fund. The second one, there was quite good comments that the two-day workshop was structured well by starting with revenue and then going through on-source OSR and intergovernmental revenues all the way down to financing and guarantees, because that's how it should be seen. And then the limitation, the guarantee has very specific limitations. It's not an instrument for all, and it helps those who already are in a level sort of better to be helped. And therefore, the foundation of intergovernmental fiscal structure is what makes the system run. EU was very clear that they want to support the guarantee system for those which can to be able to get stronger, and the ones which cannot will be supported separately through a very different support budget, and encouraged governments to reach out to EU delegation and have that discourse of between what the government needs versus what the delegation is able to do. Because otherwise, the government-specific intervention plans by the EU delegation, they are not linked in the needs of what the government needs. The 6.8 billion of guarantee support from EU is actually just the first phase. It's bigger than that. And it will depend a lot more for the other phases that they will come in the next 7 years on how utilized the first phase is, and that urban is competing with thematics like energy transition and others in the same pot, which probably have much easier way of accessing guarantees. So as a community, I think that was a caution, ability to be efficient enough to utilize them so that they are not put others. Technical assistance with these EU guarantees are support to create a market, and therefore it has to be linked to a financial transaction. It's not a capacity building of governance on its own. That will still continue to be done under the grant mechanism of EU on a bilateral basis. The guarantees to cities under the EFSD Plus should really read the blueprint of ESD Plus, because it's designed to be very, very flexible. It can guarantee almost everything, from PPPs to equity to debt to currency to political risk to others. So the idea is those who are given to define the guarantees, and for cities it was AFD and UNCDF, to look into how they can make it more usable. One of the best examples was Finland ecosystem model, which is underpinned by a legislative environment where municipal governments cannot just access guarantees through a mutual institution, but the legislation pushes the local governments to be financially responsible. Every 4 years, they have to balance the budget and 85% of their revenues is own source revenue. The intergovernmental is only 15. So the success of the Finnish guarantee government mechanism should be seen as an ecosystem and not just as an instrument. UNCDF is doing support of a solar plant in West Africa, and it started with 70% guarantee coverage, and they could still not close. It went to 95%, and the developer still couldn't put up the equity. So the devil is in the detail, because guarantees support but don't solve risk, they absorb risk. The complexity of guarantee documentation should not be underestimated. There's a trust issue between local government and central government, and that cannot be solved by a guarantee. It sometimes is justifiable because of the lack of capacity. Guarantee instruments should not be just city friendly, but they should be even more city responsive to cover the weaknesses. In developing countries, it's really hard to raise capital because the foundation of financial management still needs more legislative environment to be covered. Most national governments' public debt is aggregated between local governments and national government because of IMF and rating agencies. And it creates a zero-sum game for the fiscal space between the two. The guarantees to local governments, until today, rating agencies do not net them out into the aggregation. Therefore, it's still part of national debt, even if it's guaranteed. There's a question whether guarantee can solve a residual risk discussion. The issue of social contract between local governments and the community that it serves in the service delivery cannot be replaced. So whether there's trust or not, whether there's lack of capacity or not, there still is an obligation within the society to support local government infrastructure financing, and guarantees can help. Latin America has similar problems as upper middle class countries in Africa and Southeast Asia. There's still difficulties in access of guarantees, so it should not be part of the discussion, should be included. In many countries, urban financing is nobody's agenda.
Well, Jaffa, thank you so much. So I think you really have very comprehensively covered that session. To your question, I think you got a partial answer that still the rating agencies don't take it out, but maybe that's a reform that we can push for, because we're looking for these actionable reforms. So perhaps the rating agencies should, if there's a guarantee to a local government, they should take that out of the consideration when they rate central government. So you had a partial answer there. So I think given the time and the fact that if we carry on much longer, there'll be nobody left. I'm going to hand the floor to the Executive Director of FMDV, who also has a tight schedule because the plane is waiting for him on the runway. So to close, over to you, Carlos.
You will be closing after me, no?
I'll just say goodbye.
Yeah. No, so very sorry, I need to run, but I will not go into the details because we will have time with the minutes of the meeting and the advocacy that will come from out of this conversation. But I think that what is clear for me is that as we have been discussing and seeing with the different cases, that we are no longer alone. That's very important. And it comes with challenges and opportunities. Challenges meaning that a lot of newcomers will join us in that field that are not, that have not been experiencing the relationship with the mayors, the governors, the ministries, and are contemplating this as a new market for them. new opportunities for deals, etc. And there will be probably sometimes in different contexts, etc., depending on the networks in which they interact, there will be somehow more powerful or more proactive, not that much regarding the content of the deals, etc., but much more on the principles, on the methodologies, on and as Emilia says, the caring of the public system that is required to maintain the long-lasting support to thriving cities and regions. This means that somehow localization is the new globalization, and that's a strong component of the reflection on how we go forward, meaning we need to make sure that localization does not become what globalization has done with the way we have been developing our sectors, our trends, our economies, etc. So we need to become more market makers and make sure that the mayors, the governors, the ministers become market makers, give a strong orientation to the different stakeholders, to pressure them to better define the frameworks, the engineering, the instruments. We need to have like these keywords like partnerships, stepping out of our comfort zone. It's been repeated in different ways along the sessions. So who will we bring in and who do we trust, or who do we need to build trust with, and how will be a key element if we don't want globalization to win over localization. We live in times of emergency. We have this paper together, UNCDF, UCLG, FMDV, on climate emergency finance. What does it mean to finance in such an accelerated timeline to make sure that we are responsive to the resilience of the territories, of the systems, economic, finance, to make sure that we, in times of catastrophes and disruptive polycrisis, like the UNSG has put, how do we build the system, the networks that we need to be responsive? So it comes to the two words for me: hybridization of players, engineering mechanisms, funds, sourcing, building a new ecosystem, and that's somehow the final objective and outcome and output that we wanted for the Málaga Coalition. And the second one is subsidiarity. We've been too much discussing these topics for decades now from the global level. UN agencies, international networks, UN processes, and not enough going to the specifics of the domestic level and taking the specifics into a frame that would bring them to be systematized at one point. And we can see it in the case studies, in the examples that we heard here. It all comes from specifics, not that much from the perfect design on the paper. And this is something very complex to integrate in our organizations, which are active at the global level, even though we have country programs, etc. But we need to design better our strategies coming from the ground. And that's somehow a revolution and an evolution of our practices. Because this is now how we get the funding for our activities and all the financing. It's always big data. And this drives the reflection that we have and the framing of it. And basically, to end, what we are designing here, and if we think of piggybacking on the MDB's reform, the financial architecture, global financial architecture reform, we need to make sure that our narrative is somehow positioning the fact that designing urban resilience financing is somehow financing the future of finance. And the urban opportunity to be seized at that point requires a new system, but which is basically existing already bits by bits, but not organized as a financial architecture for subnational development. And because this is the future of our economies, this is the future of our finance. And maybe, and I'll end it with that, maybe we should audition a more diverse set of players to bring their perspective in our discussion, even though they absolutely don't have anything to do with our conversation. Just to open our minds, and that would be maybe the Málaga Coalition 2.0, to define in another way. I think we discussed enough on what we know. Maybe we need to take more risks on this. Thank you so much. I'm happy to have met some of you. Didn't have time to meet all of you, but I think we'll have time, and probably we'll see you at COP. So thank you, David.
Thank you. Well, great comments. Carlos, on your last one, I mean, if local government finance is development finance, as we've been saying, then maybe it's the future of finance. Because if local government finance is development finance, then development finance becomes local government finance, and that's the future to deal with the issues of the world. So these things we're talking about here are the way that finance should be organized into the future, with a clear definition between funding and financing, addressing the issues we've been talking about, what can be done, what's more difficult, but etc. So I think it's a really good way to finish. So all that's left now is maybe to thank those who made this possible. I don't know, Nan, Paloma, Amadou, if you want to take a stand up. Anybody? And the Malaga team too. And who's left? I mean, there's hardly anybody left. And maybe the translators. We can. And then thank everybody for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank you for those that have stayed to the very, very, very end. There's a medal on the way out. We didn't tell those that left early, but they've missed out the opportunity. Endurance medal. Oh yes, thank you. And see you all, hopefully, for a longer meeting in about a year or two's time, but by which time we will have made a lot of progress in all the areas that we've talked about. So thank you so much, and take care and have a safe journey home.
So much, everyone.